Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in AP English, and we turn now in our conversation of Homer's Iliad to book 12. We're halfway, of course, through the 24 books after this book. The Trojans storm the rampart is the title that Fagles will give to this book. Hector's final line will in fact be storm the wall. Okay, storm the wall. There are some scholars that have called books 11 through 15 of Iliad the longest day. Certainly, I think as a unit, they need to be analyzed and studied. We've already messed with Iliad 11, now we'll move to Iliad 12. However, before we get there, if you haven't been following my lectures, I recommend that you go to learnstrong.net, go down that left-hand side and find the folder for AP and watch my prior lectures. So let's just do a quick review, as we like to do, just to kind of put us in the place where we can really kind of think and study this. In Iliad 1, we've got the invocation of the Muse, and of course, the fallout between Achilles and Agamemnon. In Book 2, Agamemnon gets this dream from Zeus we call the bad dream, and that everything's going to go great for the Greeks. Won't. Catalog of ships, catalog of chariots. In Book 3, Paris and Menelaus square off against each other, and it looks like the war is over because Menelaus will have killed or defeated Paris. And then in Book 4, Hera will convince Zeus to let the fighting happen. Pandarus will shoot an arrow at Menelaus, and now we're back on again with war. Book 5 is Diomedes' Aristeia. That's that term that we'll always come back to in our study of the Iliad, that kind of type scene of the famous battle or whatever, the hero. And in Book 5, he actually fights so well that he actually wounds Aphrodite as well as Ares. Book 6, we have said, is one of the most pivotal books of the Iliad, especially early on. Hector back in the walls of Troy with Andromache, his wife, and Astyanax, his son. And it seems like he probably knows this may be the last time that they get to chat. Book 7 is Ajax versus Hector, the two great warriors, and they kind of have to fight to a stalemate or to a truce. Book 8, well, we've got Zeus's scales here, right? And the scale will be done, and of course, in the end, the Trojans are going to weigh, have a day of it, right? And Hector and the Trojans are going to jack a lot of Greeks. In Book 9, we've got the really important embassy to Achilles, Odysseus, Ajax, as well as Phaeax. But all three will try and convince him to come back, and he won't do it. I've given a review of books 1 through 9 that I call Achilles' Crisis of Faith, and here I'm talking about Achilles' decision to walk away from the warrior code. So hypercritical. You want to write this down because this is an important element of Book 12 for us. This idea of the warrior code being that quest for time and kleos, that is to say, honor and glory. In Book 10, Diomedes and Odysseus do their little night jaunt, and they jack Dolan and steal the horses. Book 11, we've got Nestor at the end. Of course, it's Agamemnon's Aristeia, but Nestor at the end convincing Patroclus that it's time for you to return. Right? Again, this idea that books 11 through 15, the longest day, as some scholars have called it, the idea that it's a unit that works unto itself. Basically, the Trojans are going to be so strong, and Achilles and Zeus are going to get their way so much that finally Patroclus in Book 16 will decide to enter, and then of course he dies. Now again, the hope is that you are annotating this information on your own. Try and read it on your own, especially by now. I mean, if you've been working with me by now, you should be able to pick this stuff up and read it on your own, and then let me help you, okay? Certainly our learning theory, we want to remind you of that ability to connect new information to old information in meaningful ways, and then the 3 levels of reading. At level 1, what does the text say? At level 2, what does the text mean? That's our 2A, themes, messages. 2B, our rhetoric stuff. Again, we're focusing in our study on just 2 of those, symbolism and irony. Some of you have asked me, well, what else could you focus on? Like, give us some examples. And I will say things like, well, we're not even really spending any time on the fact that this is a poem. For example, we could just go all the way through and do nothing but just focus on the meter of the poem, the primary epic similes of the poem. We could do that. We could talk about this text as a religious text, as a theological text if we wanted to. We could do it that way. There's a lot of different ways that we could take a look at this. The other one, along with symbol, is irony. At level 3, we ask, how do we relate to this information in meaningful ways? At 3A, other books of the Iliad and then any other text that we know. And finally, at 3B, how can I own this text? How can I relate to it personally? About any book of the Iliad, I'm always going to make the same argument. There are no throwaway books. Every book matters. And in fact, some scholars will point to an exchange that happens in Book 12, which is the most important exchange in the entire Iliad. We'll get there. Let's do a quick plot summary, as we like to do of the book, and then we'll get to the actual lines that are important. This is trench wall attack book. Okay, the Trojans are going to attack that ramparts and that trench. That's a part of the ramparts there that's protecting the Greek ships. The Greeks didn't sacrifice correctly, we're told at the beginning of this book. So someday, it's all going to be destroyed by the gods, and a really compelling line that we'll get to. The Trojans will attack on foot instead of in their chariots. That's the decision they make. And this clash at the wall and the gates of the wall are just immense. We have this sign that's going to come, sent by Zeus or No, of an eagle and a snake. It has something to do with the fact that it's on the left side of them that will seem to suggest that there's bad news here. We'll talk about it. Hector says, I don't believe in it, to Polydamas, and he says, I won't put my trust in birds. I put my trust in Zeus, right? There's lots of rock throwing by both sides and a whole lot of slaughter that's going to happen. We'll then have this very interesting exchange, I was already referencing it, between Zeus's son, actually, Sarpedon, and his pal, Glaucus. We'll hear this one. And at line 370 already, this notion of let's get some glory, since we can't live forever, right? We then have, very briefly, are the Greeks mentioned in this book. It's predominantly a Trojan book, but we do have Mencius on the wall. He calls for Ajax. Glaucus is wounded. Sarpedon calls for help. The two of the more amazing similes in the entire Iliad actually will happen to describe a stalemate between the two, because these two forces are just, fighting it out. And then, of course, the famous Hector's boulder, and he jacks the gates. And at the very end of the book, you have Hector screaming, the wall, storm the wall. The book will end, and it looks very, very bad for the Greeks, because once they're inside the wall, of course, then they're ready to attack the ships, which are made of wood, and all you got to do is set them on fire, and once you've burned up their ships, they got no way to escape, and then you slaughter all of them. So we're getting very, very close to that moment that Achilles was hoping that the Greeks would get to, without him, they're jacked. Now, we're going to go to that wall and ramparts that those Greeks made, and we're told in the opening lines that there was not appropriate sacrifice made to the gods. And because of that, ultimately, the gods are going to someday jack this. And at line 40, we get this line, so in the years to come, Poseidon and God Apollo would set things to rights once more. And we're told that, in fact, what's going to happen is that this huge flood will come down and just wash it all out. Like, in other words, humans weren't even there. I think it's important at the beginning of this book to point out that there is this interesting tension that begins to build in the Iliad about the relationship of the gods to humans. And I think it kind of comes to its fruition in some ways in a series of lines in Book 12. So you've got this fascinating study that we'll take a look at, which I'm going to argue makes this, again, one more reason to call this a classic text. It's amazing in that regard. Now, we have the Trojans at the trench. And you've got this situation about, okay, should we go across this trench and get to the walls and, and all of this. And we've got Hector talking with Polydamas. And Polydamas, we're told in line 71, stood by headstrong Hector, warning Hector and all our Trojan captains, allies in arms. It's madness, he says, to drive our teams across that trench. Impossible to traverse it. Look, the sharp stakes, jutting right at the edge. Just beyond that, the Achaean sturdy rampart. No room for charioteers to dismount and fight it out. The straits too narrow, cramped. We'll take a mauling there. I see it all. If mighty Zeus thundering up on high is bent on wiping out the Argives down to the last man, if he longs to back our Trojan forces to the hill, by heaven I hope that Father works his will at once, and the Argives die here, their memory blotted out, a world away from Argos. It's brutal to read this, ironically brutal to read this, because we know that, of course, ultimately the Trojans are all going to get slaughtered, right, in the fall of Troy. But right now, they actually think they're that close to being able to destroy all the Greeks. But what if they round on us? If the Argives roll us back away from the ships, trapped and tangled there in the yawning trench? No runner, I tell you, pressed by an Argive rally, could struggle free and bear the news to Troy. So, come, do as I say, and let us all unite. Drivers, rein your horses hard by the trench. The men themselves, armed for assault on foot. We'll all follow Hector, all in a mass attack. And the Argives, they cannot hold their line, not if the ropes of death are knotted round their necks. What an interesting word picture, right? There's a powerful symbol for you. The ropes of death are knotted round their neck. In other words, this is it. We can get this project done, right? Hector agrees. We'll fight on foot. we do have this, he's called Asius the Fool, but he decides, no, he's not going to do it. And he's not going to leave his ponies, and he's in fact going to drive right at the open gates of that wall, all right? And in the end, it's not going to go well for him. I'm at line 185 or so. So the missiles showering from their hands, Achaeans, Trojans, helmets and boss shields clashing, ringing shrilly into the blows of boulders big as millstones. So you get this rock warfare happening. Right? And now with a deep groan and pounding both thighs, Asius, son of Heritus, cried in anguish, Father Zeus, so even you are an outright liar after all. I never dreamed these heroic Argive ranks could hold back our charge. Our invincible arms look like wasps, quick and pinched at the waist. I mean, what a beautiful, pinched at the waist, right? Or bees who build their hives on a rocky path. They never give up their hollow house. They hold on, keep the honey hunters at bay, fight for their young, so these men will never budge from the gates. Though there are only 2 defenders, not till they kill us all and we kill them. But his wailing failed to move the heart of Zeus. It was Zeus's pleasure to hand the prize to Hector. So it's not Asius that in fact gets any of the klaus, the glory at all, right? And then we're told now, squad on squad, gate to gate they fought. But how can I tell it all? Sing it like a god. It's kind of almost like another invocation, isn't it? The strain is far too great. Everywhere around the wall, the surging inhuman blaze of war leapt up the rocks. The Argives, desperate, had no choice. They struggled now to defend the ships, and the gods were cast down in spirit. And all who had urged the Argive soldiers on in battle, we're told. But they continued to keep fighting, slaughtering on. It's at this point then that we have our famous sign. While the Lapiths stripped their kills of gleaming gear, the fighters trooping, I'm at line 225, trooping behind Polydamas and Hector, the greatest force, the best, the bravest, grim set above all to breach the wall and torch the ships, still halted up at the trench, torn with doubt. In other words, they're not certain. Should we do this? Should we not do this? For suddenly, just as the men tried to cross, a fatal bird sign flashed before their eyes. An eagle flying high on the left across their front. Go back to that sign from Athena that Odysseus and Diomedes will experience the night they go out to Jack Dolan. The fact that if something is on the left, that's a bad sign and all of that, right, in our earlier comments. From the left, and clutching a monstrous bloody serpent in both talons. So you got an eagle holding a serpent that's still alive, still struggling. It had not lost its flight. Writhing back to strike it, fanged the chest of its captor. Right beside the throat, and agonized by the bites, the eagle flung it away to the earth, dashed it down amidst the milling fighters, loosed a shriek, and the bird flew off along the gusty wind. So you get this really interesting symbolism at play here, where you got the eagle, a live snake, the snake's biting at the eagle lets it go. Snake falls right down in the middle of all the fighters, right? The Trojans shudder to see the serpent glistening, wriggling at their feet, a sign from storming Zeus. And Polydamas stood by headstrong Hector, saying, Hector, you always seem to attack me in assembly despite my good advice. Never right is it for a common man to speak against you, king. Never in open council, and God forbid in war. Our part is always to magnify your power. You can get a little sense that maybe Polydamas is a little bit offended by the fact that Hector is considered the greatest warrior. Well, once again, I'm bound to say what I think best. Stop the attack. Don't fight them at the ships. All will end as the omen says. I do believe if the bird sign really came to us, the Trojans, just as our fighters tried to cross the trench, that eagle flying high on the left across our front, clutching his bloody serpent in both its talons, still alive. But he let the monster drop it once before he could sweep it back to his own house. He never fed his nestlings in the inn, nor will we, even if we can breach the Argives' gates and wall, assaulting in force, and the Argives give ground, back from the ships will come, back the way we went, but our battle ordered ruined, whole battalions of Trojans left behind and killed in others. We're going to be too far away from Troy to be secure, even if we go in past this gate. We think, of course, of the German Nazis going into Russia, don't we, at the end of their fighting in Russia, don't we? The Achaeans will cut us down with bronze to save their fleet. So a knowing seer of the gods would read this omen, someone clear in his mind and skilled with signs, a man of Trojan armies would obey. So this is Polydamas' suggestion to Hector. We got to read this sign. We got to recognize we got serious problems. We need to go back to Troy. His helmet flashing. Hector wheeled with a dark glance. Enough, Polydamas. Your pleading repels me now. You must have something better than this to say. But if you're serious, speaking from the heart, the gods themselves have blotted out your senses. You tell me to forget the plans of storming Zeus, all he promised me when he nodded in assent. You tell me to put my trust in birds flying off on their long, wild wings? Never. I would never give them a glance, a second thought. Whether they fly on the right toward the dawn and sunrise, or fly on the left toward the haze and the coming dark. No. Put your trust in the will of mighty Zeus, king of the deathless gods and men who die. Birds, signs. Fight for your country. That is the best, the only. You, why are you so afraid of war and slaughter? Now he turns personal, right? Even if all the rest of us drop and die around you, grappling for the ships, you run no risk of death. You lack the heart to last it out in combat, coward. But if you hold back from the bloody foray here, or turn some other soldier back from battle, winning him over, you with your soft appeals, at one quick stroke my spear will beat you down. You'll breathe your last. Well, I mean, I don't know that a whole lot has to be said about that one, right? I mean, it's fascinating. Notice, it's all about how you interpret the signs, right? And for Hector, he's like, I've already been told I'm going to win this battle. I'm going forward. There are tons of ironies to this, right? Because in the end, obviously, Hector is not going to win in the end, right? Then there's the fighting at the walls. We got a lot of rock throwing. Again, I'll say what I've said before. I wish that I could just work through all these lines, but I cannot. We do, however, come to a pivotal moment at the walls with all this fighting. And we've got the two great warriors in Sarpedon and Glaucus, the great fighters who were there supporting the Trojans. All right? And I'm with you now at line 355. So now the heart of Sarpedon, stalwart as a god, impelled him to charge the wall and break it down. He quickly called Hippolochus' son Glaucus. Why do they hold us both in honor? He says. Glaucus, why do they hold us both in honor? First by far with pride of place, choice meats and brimming cups in Lycia, where all our people look on us like gods. In other words, he says, why are we considered so valuable back home in Lycia, where we're given the very best? Well, for example, if there's a meal, we always get the best portion or whatever. Why make us lords of estates along the Xanthus banks, rich in vineyards and plowland rolling wheat, so that now the duty's ours? We are the ones to head our Lycian front, brace and fling ourselves in the blaze of war, so a comrade strapped in combat gear may say, not without fame, the men who rule in Lycia, these kings of ours who eat the fat cuts of lamb and drink sweet wine, the finest stock we have. But they owe it all to their own fighting strength. Our great men of war, they lead our way in battle. In other words, we get Scooby snacks back home, but there is an expectation that if we get the best back home, when we come to fight, we have to be here to fight, and to fight well. That's the expectation of the people back home. Let's pause and put this in your notes. Many scholars have just simply called this the warrior code. When we meet our Beowulf, we're going to talk about the Anglo-Saxon code. The birth of the Anglo-Saxon code is in large measure here. In other words, we come here to fight to get teaming, honor, Scooby snacks, right? But there's also a sense that if we don't do well, the people back home are going to talk of us well. And if they don't talk of us well, we don't get glory, kleos, right? Now, of course, this takes us back to Achilles and his comments, no question, right? Earlier in Book 9. He says, my friend. Sarpedon talking to Glaucus. My friend, if I could escape this fray and live forever, immortal like the gods, in other words, never a trace of age, immortal, I would never fight on the front lines again or command you to the field where men win fame, kleos. But now, as it is, the fates of death awaits us, thousands poised to strike, and not a man alive can flee them or escape. So in we go for attack. Give our enemy glory, or win it for ourselves. In other words, Glaucus did not turn back or shun the call. On they charged, leading the Lycians main mass. Now, let's pause for a moment and ask, why is this such an important passage? Many scholars pointing out this may be the most important passage in all of the Iliad. At first glance, it doesn't seem like much of an exchange, but I think it's pivotal. And here's why. exchange tells us what's fundamentally different about humans and gods. Sarpedon says it. He says, we are expected to perform in the battle. But if we could live like the gods, immortal, he says, I wouldn't worry about this fighting and gaining the teaming and the glory. It is the fact that we're human, that we're mortal, that makes it such an important thing for us to do. Think about what this is actually suggesting. The difference between humans and gods is not just that humans are mortal and can die, right? Born death. But also, and gods can't die, right? But think about the implications of that. Humans can do what gods cannot do. That is to say, humans can gain glory, kleos. The gods cannot. Because the gods can never die, they never take anything that seriously. Everything is kind of frivolous. Notice in our poem the number of times that the gods are sitting in leisure up on Mount Olympus, and there's not that big of a deal about it. That is to say, the gods, they live one kind of life. It is a beautiful life to the degree that they never have to die. But there's nothing serious about it. There's nothing that can provide us with any sense of honor about it. Only humans get to experience that. Now, of course, this is going to be counterbalanced against Achilles' observations in Book 9, as I've said in earlier lectures. So this exchange is a key one. The Greeks then, for a moment, were told Mentheus is going to work hard to try to defend the wall. He calls for Ajax. He realizes they're in trouble. Ajax will kill Epicleus with a rock, and then Teucer will wound Glaucus, and Sarpedon, it looks like Sarpedon may die, and then Zeus will